Welcome to We're Gonna Run It with Joe Lisi and Terry Bowden. Week number 2 in the college football slate did not disappoint. We saw upsets across the top 25. Coach, give me your thoughts about what transpired last week and the bounce back by Texas and Arch Manning.
Well, the Texas came out about like I thought it would. I thought they could beat that team without much difficulty. And I just said Sarkisian knows quarterbacking. He knows the quarterback situation. And I told you, I said, he's going to throw 4 or 5 touchdown passes, and they're going to get him that. And really, they weren't dominant on offense, but they made sure he threw 4 touchdown passes that first half and eventually ran for another one. And that's kind of what Texas needed to do. They still don't run it as effectively all the time as they need to, but they ran it well enough. But the big thing was get some confidence from Arch Manning, and that's what they did. Of course, I saw the same thing out of Auburn with their quarterback and the way he had to get some passing yardage as well in that game they had against Ball State.
A better rushing effort out of Texas this past week against San Jose State. They struggled against the front seven of Ohio State, held to under 3.5 yards per carry, under 100 yards in that game. They bounced back with 156 yards, 4.8 yards per rush. But from a measuring stick, looking at the better teams in the SEC, we'll throw out Tennessee, LSU, Georgia. Do you still feel Texas is built to go toe-to-toe with some of the big boys in the conference?
Yeah, basically they lost to the number 1 team in the country by 7 points, and their quarterback was kind of a rookie in that situation, that's not a conference game. So, gosh, if you're going to lose one game and it be by 7 points against the number 1 team in the country, I think everybody was picking Texas to be number 1 and riding Arch Manning's back, and it didn't look as good as you wanted it to look. But they're in a position to do exactly when you look at the teams that have the talent to get to the college football playoff, and then the teams that get to the playoff have a chance to win. Texas has that kind of talent, like 3 or 4 other teams in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that you wanted to see is the confidence level out of Arch Manning. About 7 minutes in, it was a tie score. You're starting to think all of a sudden, is Arch the real deal or not? And then within the span of about 5 or 6 minutes of game time, Texas jumps out to a 21-0 lead, and all of a sudden, all eyes are on the performance, 4 touchdowns, his ability to scramble and make plays outside the pocket. We'll see what transpires for Texas the rest of the way. I'm still not sold. It's a good effort. I get it. I understand the performance against Ohio State, but I think big picture, still have concerns in the front seven. I still have concerns as well, Coach, on the outside. I think this wide receiver core still is in development. I don't think they're as complete maybe as they were last year with Gunnar Helm and Matt Golden that now is playing for Green Bay. I have to see it before I believe it, but Texas is 1-1, and you win 38-7 over San Jose State. It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, again, when you look at the overall talent, whether they're more talented than last year or Ohio State is more talented than last year, that's debatable no matter how good they are, because those were great football teams last year. But when you say, okay, who has the ability to go out there, get hot in the playoff time, win their enough games during the season, get hot in the postseason, have enough talent depth to last through injuries, you got to keep Texas in that category. But I think I still have all the questions you have. It's not like, boy, they're way up there and everybody else is further down. We've got several teams, 4 or 5 at the top, and I think it's amazing. You may see more teams from the Big Ten in the top 5 teams this week than the SEC, but it's pretty dang close.
There were some great 12 o'clock games. We're going to get into those. Baylor, the upset over SMU. That was a back and forth affair. And I know there was a couple of delays due to weather. Georgia was one of them. They were struggling with Austin Peay. They had a 14-3 second quarter lead. They were delayed for about an hour and a half. But the big story, I think, came out of the ACC. Everybody expected Cade Klubnik and Clemson to bounce back with a huge monumental effort. We turn it on, and I had a text here. It was 7-0 Troy before the delay. They had a 17-point lead on Clemson at one point, and all eyes were on Dabo. Is this team going to lose 2 in a row?
Yeah, and they had a weather delay too, and I don't know if that took the edge off of Clemson at home like that, because that quietens up a crowd a little bit too when you have a lightning threat and all that stuff. But I now have doubts. And I'm an observer. I'm an analyst. I know what I'm looking at, and I have doubts. I said, you know what? I'm not so sure they're as good as Dabo convinced me they were. And I'm a big Dabo fan, and so, but you got to scrutinize everything, because sometimes when they're talking about how good their team is, they're not just talking about how good they are, but how trying to convince them how good they are. But they started out slow. They got way behind, and this is not the Troy team that John Sumlin had 2 years ago in the Sun Belt. This is a team that did not have a good record last year, and not a great Troy team. And only because I coached in the Sun Belt and I coached against all these people, and that was pretty amazing. And we'll talk about Georgia Tech game later. But I have my doubts now. I've got to now with Clemson. I've got to see it to believe it, because I don't believe it.
Right, I'm with you. Again, now I think this will be again a telltale sign when they face off against Georgia Tech. Traditionally, they have owned the series against the Yellow Jackets, and we'll dive deeper a little bit later in the show, obviously later in the week. But you mentioned Troy not being the same team, being from the Sun Belt. Is this a typical Sun Belt quarterback, Goose Crowder for Troy? Goose. He completes 19 of 31, coach, 223, had a touchdown, but the 3 critical interceptions. I mean, Troy wasn't afraid of Clemson, and I think that's the biggest thing when we talk about dominance, right? Even last week, if they were able to get the victory, let's just say over LSU, teams don't walk into Death Valley anymore and start to fear the Clemson Tigers. We talked about it last week. They've lost some games over the last couple of years. That home field advantage is starting to slip a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of what we've been talking about Alabama in the SEC. And same thing with Clemson. They've been that dominant team for so long in the ACC. I think teams are beginning to not fear them. They had losses. Once you start having some losses at home, or you start getting beat or playing badly against weaker teams, that doubt starts to arise, but also confidence in other teams. And when I didn't want to downplay Troy, when John Sundlin was there during my years at ULM, they were the best team in the conference by far, and it dipped a little bit last year. And I was interested to think that they could go into Death Valley and play as well as they did. But maybe it is that quarterback with that gunslinger of a quarterback
Goose.
They got.
Goose. We'll see how Troy. Now Troy. We'll dive into the week 3 slate later in the week. Coach and I will be on, but Troy covers the large number against Clemson. They're only catching 5.5. They're a home dog to Ryan Silverfield in Memphis. That's a tricky spot coming off an emotional cover. They don't get the win, obviously, but they did push Clemson to the limit. How do they respond now coming back home against the Tigers? We'll break down that game a little bit later. You mentioned Alabama. Kalen DeBoer on the hot seat all week. He's had to answer questions. He was up at the podium. My guys are focused. Ty Simpson is the real deal. They put on a display against your former team, the Warhawks. They cover the line 73-0. That was the highest performance even during the tenure of Nick Saban. Prior to that, the most points they put up during the Nick Saban era was 66. They tack on 73 to ULM. My question to you is, better, obviously, defensive effort. Is Alabama back, or was this just window dressing?
Well, I don't know that. Well, they were obviously so much better. They had the ball 11 times during that game. They scored all 11 times, 10 touchdowns for 70 points and 1 field goal. They were just that much better than ULM. And I got beat pretty bad. It was in the 60s when I went up there 3 or 4 years ago. And that can happen with a team like that needed the rebound. But I said this last week as you and I talked. Nothing that they did against ULM is going to shut down that negative boo-boos, the boo birds there. They are so convinced that something's wrong. They're so convinced in that town and in that state of Alabama that they've lost so many underdog type of wins. It's going to take more than just ULM. I think they needed ULM. I think the quarterback needed that game and their team needed that game. But to be honest with you, I know their fans. I've coached against them enough. Even Wisconsin, a good win against Wisconsin's not going to settle it. It's going to be after that when they play some other good, really good teams in the conference. Are people going to start saying, "Well, maybe we just had a bad game"? But they did everything they could, and I don't think it just people just aren't talking bad, but they're still feeling bad and nervous about things in Tuscaloosa.
It's a 20.5 point spread against Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Wisconsin's 2-0, but Danny O'Brien took over for Billy Edwards. They're a little bit handcuffed. Obviously, it's amazing. No matter who the head coach is, Barry Alvarez, Paul Chryst, and now Luke Fickell, they can't get a passing attack to throw more for potentially 190 yards per game. They're going to have to bring their A game, because when they faced off against Alabama last year, that was the game where they had Miami transfer Tyler Van Dyke. He gets hurt in the first quarter of that matchup, and Alabama blew them out. We know that Wisconsin's completely one-dimensional. Could they make it a game, or is this the perfect opponent yet again for Alabama to potentially get right, because there's no threat of a passing attack?
Yeah, I tend to think it's still the right opponent at the right time for Alabama to get everything in order before they get to that conference. 'Cause I don't think there's a team in the SEC that has an easy schedule when it comes to their SEC opponents. Everybody in that league, I don't care whether you're one of those teams that maybe 7 or 8 wins. How do it's tough every week, and so I think Alabama gets a Wisconsin team that right now I haven't got decided, but I'm leaning towards Alabama against the spread, even because of how badly they beat them last year and how effective they can be when they're better than someone, as they were against ULM.
Yeah, there were some definite upsets. I want to get your take, because one of them was a team that I thought would step up week one, and that was Baylor. They went toe-to-toe for 3 quarters. They drop a heartbreaker to Auburn and Jackson Arnold. They catch 2.5 points on the road to Kevin Jennings and SMU. They went toe-to-toe with them for a half. Second half, SMU decides to pull away by 2 scores. Sawyer Robertson playing lights out, another 400-yard performance, coach. They push it into overtime and steal it 48-45. We talked about the home field dominance of SMU. I was more impressed with Baylor on Saturday.
Yeah, that quarterback again has bailed them out. I mean, SMU's got to be shooting themselves in the foot for losing that ball game. They're up 14 points with 5.5 minutes left, and they let Baylor throw the ball down the field and catch up at the end of the game, then win it in double overtime. But Sawyer Robertson and the Baylor offense is pretty incredible. They're going to score a lot of points. Now, they're giving up some. They're giving up some running game against Auburn and passing game against SMU. But Baylor's going to win football games with that quarterback and that offense. But I was kind of picking. I just got, Baylor's too good to be 0-2. SMU had all that home field, 15 out of 16 games won at home, and really they should have won it. I was ready to concede that I guessed wrong on that one. But I tell you, coming back and Baylor not with that quarterback, they can be in every game. It's not Cam Ward, but he's got that kind of feel for their team. He can score from anywhere.
And Josh Cameron, a very underrated wide receiver, only had 2 catches, 54 yards against Auburn. The kid breaks out, coach. He had a 54.5 receiving prop based off of the week 1 performance. Had 73 yards receiving in the first half with a touchdown. Finishes with a $151 and 2 touchdowns. The kid's got great hands. More importantly, he wears a running back number 34. Have to find out the backstory about that kid, but he's a definite performer in the Big 12, potentially a Biletnikoff, finalist, because the kid stepped up and really sustained drives for the Bears. We'll see how it transpires the rest of the way. I do like Sawyer Robertson to potentially, if he can run the table, coach, and let's say be like Rocco Becht and Iowa State last year, and obviously Arizona State that made it to the Big 12 championship game. If Baylor is there in conference play, from a numbers perspective, he could potentially be a dark horse for the Heisman.
Oh, yeah. Anytime you start taking your team towards a conference championship game and you're putting up numbers like that, he's going to put up the numbers. And I was just going to say, some receiver on his team's going to catch a lot of passes. He going to get 400 yards. So you can just kind of figure those receivers are going to get yardage when you have a prop bet with those receivers because he's going to throw it for 400 yards. And I do think Baylor has a good chance to be in this in the Big 12 championship hunt. I've got Iowa State out there playing real well too. Another win over Iowa. But it's going to be down to the wire with them. And I think Baylor, these early games we see and people lose a close ball game. And when you think it's affected their whole year, it's not even a conference game. Auburn's not a conference game. Even SMU loses to Baylor, not a conference game. You go down the list, some of these losses seem devastating when they come the first game of the season, but it's a non-conference game. And we're playing for the conference champion. One goal is the conference championship. And you don't have to go undefeated to get to the playoffs like in the old days where you had to get into 2-team playoff or even a 4. You got a big shot of getting in there with a loss or two.
When you talk about non-conference losses, right, I think there was one that really stood out for me. And it's just maybe this team isn't as good because when you look at the odds perspective, at the start of the year, it was Kansas State ahead of the likes of Iowa State, ahead of the likes of Arizona State, Texas Tech, and Baylor. They come out, they lose that game in Ireland. It was a blue-collar game, back and forth. They lose it by 3, 24-21. They got put on life support last week at home in Manhattan where they had to battle an FCS opponent. They win it 38-35. And then all of a sudden, they got to stop the triple option. They jump out 10-0 against the Cadets on Saturday, laying 17.5, Coach. They lose the game outright, 24-21. And I understand not a conference loss, but now 2 losses in the first 3 games. Kansas State, and I'm not suggesting it, but potentially from a psychological perspective, might be like we saw Florida State last year.
Yeah, and again, when we're talking about the Big 12, you're not talking about teams that can lose a couple of games and still make the playoffs. And when you start that far down, getting back into the playoff hunt is a little difficult. And the way they've lost their games, you've got to wonder if they're just a little bit less than what people expected. Now, I'll say this about Kansas State. Their quarterback is a gazelle. He can run. He's smooth. He's pretty. But I didn't think he managed that offense as well as Rocco Becht when they were playing Iowa State. I had a whole different opinion about the quarterback at Kansas State after I watched those two play and the way Rocco Becht at Iowa State, and that was the first game of the year, played in Ireland, the way he managed his offense, the way he mimicked his head coach in the what decision making and playing a very clean football game. I didn't see that. I worry a little bit more about Kansas State and them getting that kind of play out of a very, very talented quarterback.
Now, you mentioned Iowa State and Rocco Becht. They jump out early. They hang on. They win another heartbreaker against Iowa. That was a series that we broke down where the road team had won 5 straight right up in the series. So Iowa does cover the 3.5, but that was another gutty defensive effort by the Cyclones. I had said, it's as good as the offense is with Rocco Becht, and we know that Carson Hansen, they can run it, they can throw it. They're very balanced this year. The biggest change about why I feel Iowa State is more of a contender this year than maybe last year is that front 7 now is getting after it. They had one of the worst rush defenses last year in all of college football, giving up 188 yards per game. This was a team in Iowa. Granted, it was a week 1 matchup against Albany, but they still rushed for 310 yards on the ground. They hold the Hawkeyes to only 131 yards in that game, 3.4 yards per carry. That front 7, Coach, is starting to develop at just the right time.
Yeah, they really are. And again, I don't care if you hit in a league, if it's Big 12, it was considered a kind of a passing league, whereas you'd have more of a running attack league in the Big 10. You're eventually going to cause problems. If you're so good against the run, people can't run on you. Even if they're a team that loves to pass, now they're passing in long yardage situations. Even great passing teams, they love first down because that's when you got a chance to throw for a lot of big yardage, big plays, wide open receivers. And when you can stop the run completely, you put people in bad passing situations, and that's why, to me, it still boils down to how well you can stop the run, because a lot of people throw for a lot of yardage between the 20s, but they don't go win football games, because when you get down to the red zone, you got to be able to run that ball when they know you're going to run it.
The best games, I believe, happen in the Big 12. We'll keep it there for two more, and then we'll jump back to the SEC.
Yeah.
That battle in Norman with John Mateer and Bryce Underwood. But the game in Stark Vegas, you and I had talked about it. I said the cowbells could be an issue for Sam Leavitt. Now, I thought still Sam Leavitt and Arizona State were more complete than what I saw out of Jeff Lebby and Mississippi State. But somehow, some way, Coach, they pulled that game out. That has to be one of the biggest wins for Mississippi State going back to the Mike Leach days. It's been a long time since they had a regular season win like that.
And they have something good happen to them, and it happened at home. They're 2-0 right now, beating Southern Miss and winning the maybe the preseason favorite for the Big 12, at least the champion from last year, and did it and had a great win. And of course, this excites that crowd. That's a great place to play at home. Not for I played there as an opponent. It's not a great place to walk into, but this is a big win, a big win for Mississippi State, because they've sunk down to the bottom, and have had some great teams there in the past, and that's an intimidating place to play. And so I think it's a good sign for Mississippi State. You got to be pulling for them because they've had some heartaches and some losses this past year, and it's good to see them get back in the game with an Arizona State team that was predicted to be so good in the Big 12.
Yeah, the other game that was a shootout, and if you bet the total, you'd never look back. It was Kansas and Missouri. Kansas was a 6.5-point road dog in this matchup. Former Penn State quarterback Bo Prabula was the main guy. Missouri just asserted physicality. They were the more complete offensive and defensive lines.
Yeah.
They were able to run it, throw it. Eli Drinkwitz does a really nice job of motivating his team. I want to say he does a great job of getting more out of less than maybe anybody in the SEC. Another dominant effort. Last year, Missouri was potentially looked at as that team to maybe challenge for an outside shot at the SEC. Any chance Missouri can make some noise within the conference this year?
Now, to me, having coached in the SEC and knowing the wealth of facilities and finances and tradition and history and all those things of the Alabamas and Georgias and Texas, they would be a dark horse. For a Missouri to get to the championship game and win it, to win the SEC, to be a champion, it's not only are they a dark horse, it's going to take something special, because not only do they have to play above and beyond, a lot of teams that have more talent going to have to play down and play down, and not as good as they should play. So, but again, could it happen? Yes. It doesn't happen very often, and you're always saying this is the year that a team like Missouri, South Carolina, Auburn, Tennessee, Texas A&M, you can just name them. Each of them have and even Arkansas. Throw Arkansas in because they haven't.
Oh, I love that team. I love that team, baby.
I tell you, they find a way to win ball games, and they are a very physical team. I live in Northeast Louisiana. A lot of Arkansas graduates and fans up here, but they are a lot of those hogs, and they played a good game, and they've got a good game coming up this week.
Yeah, against Ole Miss, and we'll get into that as we turn our attention to the SEC. You hit a nerve with me because now, since we know each other, you and I date back about 24 years now, dating back to ABC. When we were working at ABC, that had to be the pinnacle, Coach, okay, of Arkansas football for me. Now, I'm going to show my age. I grew up with the days of Billy Ray Smith and Quinn Grovey and Barry Foster and, all those great players for Arkansas when they were part of the Southwest Conference. But for me, that Matt Jones, the Corey Birmingham, Houston Nutt teams, Felix Jones, McFadden, those Peyton Hillis, those teams from 2001 or 2002 going to like 2006 or 7 was the heyday of hog football for me. I mean, amazing. Woo, pitch. I love it. Love it.
They knew what they were. That, of course, there's a whole backstory there with Gus Malzahn going in there with the quarterbacks from Springdale High School, and Houston Nutt wanting to run the ball and he wanting to do it a little different. They had their split up, but Arkansas said, you know what, we're going to run the damn ball. And that's what they did. I think of our title, we're going to run it. That's what they said, we're going to run it. And they did. And it was. Now, you can go back in the 60s with Jerry Jones and a lot of other Frank Broyles and some great football teams that Arkansas has had in the past. They've had plenty of tradition, but in the modern era, that was about as good as it gets at Arkansas.
Absolutely, and it's a perfect segue to talk about the SEC. We talked about the matchup in Norman. Would Bryce Underwood and Michigan be able to move the football against that front seven? Can they have enough chunk plays over the top to potentially go toe-to-toe with John Mateer? Oklahoma started fast. They jump up 7-0, really never look back. I saw some positives out of Bryce Underwood, but at the end of the day, Coach, I think when we're just looking at the skilled talent of Oklahoma, better quarterback, better wide receivers, better offensive philosophy in the sense that if they were trailing in that matchup, you had more confidence in Mateer and Oklahoma than you did Michigan. Rushing attack was non-existent as well, long third down situations. Michigan came with the brand name. They just couldn't back it up on Saturday night.
No, it's kind of played out like I thought it would, and we talked about that. The veteran quarterback against the sensational National High School Recruit of the Year at Bryce Underwood, and Mateer, who was probably the best quarterback in the portal. He's now probably leading the Heisman. If you had to vote today, he's right up on the top with the odds because of how he played in a big game. But Oklahoma more balanced. More balanced on offense. They can throw and they can run. And then Brent Venables going on defense. And that's a lot of maturity versus a lot of inexperience when you say, okay, it's Brent Venables versus Bryce Underwood. Him calling the plays, the exotic blitzes, putting pressure on. And now Michigan, if they can't run the ball consistently a lot, you force that quarterback to play ahead. And normally, Oklahoma was just better. I've got them up there in that elite group. Not quite yet in that top 3 or 4, but they're in that dark horse group that we've talked about with a lot of these other schools that are right on the edge of being the 2 or 3, because there's about 4 teams, LSU, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia. You put those guys in that higher level of odds, then there is a bunch that could knock those guys off, and they all play each other. Going to be interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I'll tell you why personally I can't buy in just yet, and I want to get your take because I brought it up on the pregame as well. This is a monumental win and maybe a gauge for Brent Venables, right? He came in, it was a lackluster season. They were 6-7 overall. They lose to Navy in the bowl game, dramatic fashion, going for 2, and Michael Hawkins and that team can't convert. You bring in John Mateer. He lives up until this point, up to the hype. But then when you look at their schedule, Coach, I'm going to mention their road games, okay? They have the Red River rivalry coming out in a couple of weeks. There's no guarantee they're going to win that, right? Rivalry game.
Nope.
Right. They have this will make or break Oklahoma's season and potentially whether they could challenge. Road games at Williams-Brice, South Carolina, Athens, Georgia, okay? And then Tennessee. Alabama.
Yeah.
Could they get through that gauntlet, Coach, and still be a contender? That is not an easy schedule. The Red River rivalry, going into Williams-Brice, going to Tennessee. We don't know what Tennessee is going to be this weekend. They're already catching 3.5 points because of the injuries to Georgia from a defensive perspective in back-to-back weeks, nonetheless. This is the schedule. You ready? After the Red River rivalry, you go Texas, at South Carolina, home to Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Alabama, Missouri at home. That is a gauntlet of a schedule.
All top 25s and all tough games, and that's why you don't have to go undefeated in the SEC. If there's 4 big ones, if they can win 2 out of 4, and they go 10-2 there in the playoffs, they're probably in the conference championship.
You're right. 10-2 will get them there.
Because what's got to happen now is these, and in the SEC especially, and the Big Ten is getting more like that as they get 3 or 4, Oregon and Penn State and Ohio State, and you throw Illinois maybe in there. Now, you all of a sudden you got teams that are going to get a couple of losses and still make the playoffs or play for the conference championship. And then it comes back to how deep is my talent? How healthy are we at the end of the season? Because just like the NFL now, that's how college is becoming. How strong and how can we be in the postseason? Because that's when you got to have depth and depth of talent. And that's where you got to see it happen. So again, Oklahoma, no, can they get through it without getting knocked off? No, but they don't have to. They have to make sure they beat the Michigans and beat the teams that they can beat, and then go out there and try to get at least half of those four top ones, and then win the rest. But it's not easy because everybody is out there thinking the same thing.
Now, we saw the big boys. We saw Miami struggle for a half, but they pull away against Bethune-Cookman. We saw LSU vanilla, right, against La Tech. That was a lackluster effort. They run it. They had a 10-0 halftime lead. They pull away in the second half. Thoughts about LSU? And on the flip side, their opponent, they thought they would just walk through the motions against USF. You and I had said interstate rivalry, the Bulls could be live. They win it outright. Billy Napier's back on the hot seat.
Yeah, dadgum, South Florida, they've beaten two top 25 teams. And when we look at some other near poor playing games, LSU in their game against La Tech, or maybe Georgia playing Austin Peay, USF's a different team than that. USF's in that Memphis or that old Boise State last year level. They're in a place where they can recruit great players, in a state where they can recruit great players, and they have shown that they're real good. Of course they got Miami this week, and it's going to be interesting when we talk about that one. But I tell you, that one shocked me because I had put my marbles in DJ Langway, and that he would, and that their coach was over the hump now, and things were going to go smooth for him. But I've never seen a hot seat he got away from the hot seat, and he's right back on it again because of this South Florida team and how good they are. And remember, somebody in that group of six is going to make the playoffs. And right now, you'd have to say USF right now is leading. And I looked at their schedule. They've got some tough ones, but they can very easily lose one or two and get to 10 and be that highest ranked group of six team that makes the playoffs.
Well, they have to play Miami this week. Miami's a 17.5-point home dog. I think from the wagering perspective, we could dive into it in a couple of minutes, a little bit later. That's a tough ask. You knock off a top 25 opponent, Boise. You're riding high. You get that interstate rivalry where Florida, you pull it out on a last-second field goal. I know you're not going out of state, but now you got to go back on the road to South Beach. And, oh, by the way, knock off a top 10 up. That is a tough ask. And this was a team in Miami that really, if you watch that game, and I watched that game last year, it was close for a half. But interior line, Miami just wore them down in the second half. They couldn't get to Cam Ward in the second half in a pass rush. Miami was ripping off runs and big throws. If they play that way, Miami should be able to dominate this game. To see it at 17.5 is a huge number, don't you think?
Oh no, I'm looking at this game, and I don't think they can play with like you said, for 4 quarters. They're going to be inspired and confident. And they are very good. They went toe-to-toe physically with Florida. Florida couldn't protect the quarterback. They couldn't run on them. And that's a good Florida, athletically a good Florida football team. But when you talk about 17.5 or the points, I'm having a hard time. I mean, I'm gonna jump all over that probably. And I think Miami's going to win the game, but I'm gonna jump all over that spread.
The other game in the SEC. You and I were on different sides. It went right down to the wire. And you know what, Coach? Let me just say this. Lane Kiffin allowed Kentucky to cover that line. Did you see what transpired in the final minute of that game? He kicks the field goal. So the spread in the line opened up earlier in the week where it was as high as 12.5. Ole Miss, we talked about it again. The last 4 meetings were decided by a total of 2.5 points. Last year, Vandegrift and Kentucky pull it outright. The line closed right around 17. They won it outright 20-17 against Jackson Dawn. Zach Calzada, the offense starts hot. They jump up 10-0. Simmons and Ole Miss start ripping off runs, throws, right? Zach Calzada, they tie it, and then all of a sudden it's like, all right, you want to play up tempo? We could do that. Before you could blink, it's 30-20, and I'm like, I lost this game. There's no way I'm going to win.
I was thinking I won it.
Right? I know. He calls timeout. Now, I understand. Now, here's the thing. So they drive the length of the field. Kentucky does with about a minute left. They have no timeouts remaining. There's about 21 seconds left, and they get down to the 22-yard line. Now, there's two trains of thought. Sometimes you'll see coaches with no timeouts go for it to try and score the touchdown. But ultimately, you have no shot to win the game with that type of mentality because you're down 2 scores. The only way you could win it is kick the field goal, then kick the onside kick, hope you recover it and throw a Hail Mary, and somehow, some way you tie it up. By going for the touchdown, you're just going to run the clock out and never have a shot to win. But they were lined up to call the play, and Kiffin gives them a timeout, and then he runs out the kicker. What is he thinking?
I don't know. Did you see him apologize to his fans? Because they all bet on, he was 8.5-point spread, and he knows what the spread is. And people think coaches don't know. They know what the spread is. He apologized to his fans because fans are fans. They bet on their own team, you know. Right. But 8.5, no, I couldn't believe it because I'll be honest with you. Kiffin kind of knows what he's done. I just wondered why he gave him that opportunity at that point. But that just goes to show you, because like I said, that's the difference between you winning that one and me losing that one, because it was about 10 points. And I said, that's what I was hoping it would be when it went to 8.5. But nope, 7 was the answer.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong. The fan base in schools like Ole Miss, Auburn, big-time schools, right?
Right.
They'll give you a pass. And what I mean by this is this. You cover that game against Kentucky, they love you, right? Yep. Don't call the timeout. He covers against Georgia State. Yep. He covered against Kentucky, right? You lose a top 25 game, narrowly, they'll forget it, right? You don't cover that game, it gets magnified when you lose it, right? Yeah. They'll be knocking on his door every the next loss he has.
Well, it's funny that we talk about this, but people are the coaches are much smarter now about this. The one thing you can do as a coach, you can say, I don't know what everything, but I know what we're favored by. I'm going to try to beat them as much as I can because my nutty fans are going to be voting on. But they'll be booking me. They'll be picking me no matter what, because that's what fans do when they bet on their own team. I'm always going to try to score as many as I can, kind of knowing deep down what the spread is, because that's just what you do. And there's nothing wrong with that, trying to score. But there are others. I want to say, I remember, I was thinking Iowa State set on the ball on the 1-yard line when they had a chance to go get a touchdown and win by the spread. I think that was against Kansas State. They just took a knee. They took it. And I thought that was awful big of him because a lot of coaches would have pushed that one in there. That into the touchdown. He took the knee and did the proud thing and walked out of there with a win.
Have you seen enough out of Austin Simmons? He struggled week 1.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked a little deer in the headlights early. He started to get, the RPO game going a little bit in the second half. I thought the offensive line came together a little bit, more in the second half.
Right.
I don't know, Coach, and tell me if I'm wrong, if this defensive front seven is as dominant this year as they were last year with Walter Nolan.
No. I mean, I was at the Ole Miss Georgia game in Oxford. They were just so dominant against a very talented Georgia. They're not quite that. And I'll say this, whether it be a Bryce Underwood or Simpson at Ole Miss, the quarterback at Ole Miss, they're still rookies. They're still first-year stars. They're gonna be some games they don't look good the entire game. And I think that maybe as much as anything, when it gets down to winning 10 games or more, you're going to have the quarterback make some mistakes because of his youth, as opposed to, Jackson Dart, sucker, he'd been there for a while. He was there in good and awful good and big games.
Right. The other 2 games that we didn't talk about, just get your quick thoughts. Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State have lost it. Their identity, They were a 28.5-point dog to Dan Lanning in Oregon. They started to back up Flores. I mean, Coach, I mean, this offense is pathetic. You know, it's a shame that they fell off a cliff as quick as they did last year. They had Alan Bowman that basically started the year from Texas Tech, and he had bounced around Michigan, and just, you know, he was just, you know, a 27-year-old quarterback, struggled. They had Ollie Gordon last year. They lost their identity, and now I don't know what to do. But I will say this: if Mike Gundy doesn't get to at least 8 wins, I'm in the camp that I think they're going to let him go. They're going to have to move on in Stillwater.
Yeah, or he'll retire or give it somewhere that'll be a mutual agreement. But I had the impression when he started making comments publicly about Oregon's number of money, the money they were putting into the NIL, that he was conceding. He was conceding that they couldn't play with him, and that doesn't sound like Mike Gundy of old. You know, bold and out there making big plays, and you know, and just out there doing great things, but it just didn't sound like it. And I'm not so sure. And again, I got a dad. My father coached till he was 81 years old, and they probably thought he did a little too long. And I went to 68 years old, but I was going to go to 70. Got a new AD, and he kind of told me that I wasn't going to go till I was 70. But I think Mike Gundy's at that point when they probably need a little new blood. But I will say this: Nick Saban talked about it this past weekend. Some of the teams that historically have had the facilities, have had the advantages in so many ways. The billionaires, the big money buck people, they're up in Big Ten country or they're in Texas country, but they're not on. I mean, all those teams in Alabama or Mississippi or Louisiana, we don't have as many billionaires or people to throw money at you like a Phil Knight at Oregon or several people. He had unbelievable numbers, and I don't know if that's true or not, but it's beginning to change things about it. You see teams start to jump in and teams that fall out because Oklahoma State, you know, when you talk about Barry Sanders and some of the players they had, you know, we talked about Hartley Dykes and some of the players they got in the 70s and 80s. The going rate wasn't as much back then for these great players as it is now.
No, and they're going up, you know, you think about it, they're not just going up like you mentioned, the Oregons, just from an in-state, Texas, Oklahoma, right? Forget the big boys, Texas, Oklahoma. TCU now has success with Sonny Dykes. Texas Tech has one of the highest NIL deals with Joey McGuire. He's done a fantastic job in Lubbock. So they're starting to lure that talent to other programs that maybe potentially Gundy was getting in the top 20 because they had consistency.
Right.
Now with money in the NIL, they're going maybe local. You see Baylor improve. You see SMU improve. This is all recruiting landscape that Oklahoma State has to go up against. It's a tough hill to climb sometimes.
And there's another factor, too, having recruited and coached in Florida with 18 million people and Texas with about 25. There are so many football players that grow up wanting to be at Texas or wanting to be at Florida. Well, now they want to be where they get the most NIL. That no longer applies anymore. You know, I don't care what team you grew up liking. That's not who you choose on signing date. You choose who creates the best NIL package for you, even if you got to go across the country. And now all of a sudden the states, I mean, Louisiana has always been great because they could put a fence around that state. And if there was a good one, those high school coaches sent him to LSU. Now you got to get the ones that aren't national, but your 8 or 9 best players are getting recruited by everybody in the country, and you could very well lose them to a school somewhere else. Texas Tech, because they've got big NIL money.
Absolutely. And again, we'll see what Oklahoma State does the rest of the way. They did have a 5.5 win total this year. They didn't win a Big 12 game all of last season. They did play in 2 Big 12 championships. Last one came a couple of years ago against Texas. The last one prior to that was against Dave Aranda, and the Baylor Bears lost that matchup on a final touchdown that potentially Jaylen Warren could have had, but he got stuffed at the goal line back in 2021. So we'll see exactly what happens. I do want to take a quick look at this one game because you were high on both quarterbacks, Luke Ottmeyer for Illinois and Duke Darian Mensah that stepped up. Give me your thoughts because it was close for a half, but then all of a sudden the physicality of Illinois' offensive line took over. Altmaier attacked that secondary over the top. Very impressive road win by the Fighting Illini and Brett Bielema.
Yeah, I thought because of their veteran quarterback. Now I'm gonna tell you something. Menz is a really good quarterback. He's got a lively arm. Now he'll flick it maybe a little quicker than he should sometimes, but he's got one of those quick release, big time arms, and they paid to get him, and he's a very good one. And I thought Duke played with such a tenacious, tough D. They were fast. They flew around the ball. They were all over Illinois. But the power of Illinois and the strength of Illinois, plus Luke Altmaier, who to me one of the better quarterbacks in the country, is the reason they were number 11 and the reason they pulled away. So I'm beginning to go more with the team that has the consistent, dependable, strong running attack. To go with a good, solid quarterback is going to have the advantage if everything else is equal, and that's what happened. Illini pulled away from a Duke team that started out really good. They got after Illinois. I mean, it looked like, said, dang, that isn't a team. That isn't the old Dukes I remember in the old days, And they've been better than that. And now, because I kept thinking about what you said, can a Duke push up and be a contender for the conference championship? And I said, gosh, I don't think so. I know they can win 9 or 10 once in a while, but I don't think they can consistently get the players. Now, the university has committed, saying we're going to go after players in football just like we do in basketball, but that's a we'll see when I think that. But to me, Illinois is showed why they're the top 11 in the country. I think they're going to be a great team to be dealt with. They could easily knock off somebody that they're not supposed to in the Big Ten, whether it be a Penn State or an Ohio State or an Oregon. They do have that physicality that shows on a Brett Bielema type of team.
Yeah, and I think if we're just looking measuring stick, Michigan, Illinois, Illinois abused them in Champaign last year. They ran all over them. They contained them. Now we'll see what Bryce Underwood could do, but I think there's more optimism surrounding Illinois entering week 3 than potentially the Michigan Wolverines, even though Michigan went toe-to-toe in Norman against a top 25 opponent. The way they beat up Duke in the second half, I think Illinois is a little bit more complete heading into Big Ten play and more importantly, week number 3.
Yeah, I'm all with you. Like I said, I felt good about Illinois in that game. I felt like their strength would come out in the second half and overpower Duke. But now that I watched them play, it's going to be interesting how their season goes in the Big Ten, because I think they've got enough talent and they're physical enough that they're not going to get run over by Penn State or Ohio State or even Oregon, the top 3 teams probably people are picking in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. Let's turn our attention to the top 25 this week. So we'll look at the big one, 2 big ones in the conference. We'll start with Florida and LSU. Now, Florida opens as a 9.5-point underdog. LSU has won 7 of the last 10 in the series. You look at this matchup, this was the game that LSU walked in there. They struggled. DJ Lagway had a huge second half. They pull it out. Now they're catching 9.5 to open. We've seen this market across multiple books here. It's down to 8.5. I think people are looking potential look-ahead spot maybe for Florida, and now they're going on the road. This maybe conference game should get the most out of the Gators. Billy Napier did say he's going to be calling the plays. He's not relinquishing it in any capacity. Thoughts early on about LSU Florida?
Well, one of the reasons they lost that game was play calling. And if you're the best at play calling, do it. But I really felt in the last series with 2.5 minutes left, the play calling was not good in that game against South Florida. He called a speed. I remember he called an out on 1st and 10. He called an out that went incomplete. And I have a rule. He threw a little quick 5-yard out, and the guy was wide open, and the quarterback missed it. So I'm thinking, if he didn't hit that 10 out of 10 times in practice, I wouldn't call it in that situation, because all it did was stop the clock. Then it stopped it again 2 plays later. So if Billy feels like he's the best play caller, then he needs to get back in there and be a part of that calling plays. But they've got to correct their penalties. They had 12 penalties in that game. The last drive that South Florida took down the field to kick the field goal, they had 2 15-yard penalties. One was spitting on another player, and the other one was a defensive holding. And that's the kind of stuff that fans don't forget. You don't forgive either. That kind of personal foul, unsportsmanlike conduct. So again, I'm a big, I really like the type of person that Billy Napier is. My brother gave him his first job at Clemson and hired him as a full-time coach later on. And he's one of the good guys, but I saw mistake after mistake in ways that you can't win football games again. And they made some of them in that game that they can't make and win ball games. So I'm not ready to. I think they'll play better. I like the line. I like the spread a little bit with Florida going there and playing there above and beyond what they can do, but they won't have enough to beat LSU down there in Baton Rouge.
Now, a couple of keys for LSU. Trey'Dez Green, their starting tight end, out for this game. But, I felt like it was a vanilla type of game plan out of Brian Kelly. I didn't think he'd show a whole lot. Nussmeier was contained for the most part. We saw the rushing attack take over. Now with 8.5 and playing at home, we know that Death Valley is a different stadium, at night under the lights than it is at 3:30 Eastern. So I'm expecting to get LSU's best effort. Do you put a lot secondary tight end coming in and obviously having to rely on Bowers Sharp and some of the other secondary guys? Nick Anderson stepped up to transfer for Oklahoma. Aaron Anderson, Barry and Brown. I just think it's way too much offense for LSU.
No, it is running back, wide receiver, quarterback. The way the defense is playing, and I think you got to remember, in the state of Louisiana now, Louisiana Tech's about 30 minutes from here. Ruston is about 30 minutes from where I live. They have not had a good program the last couple of years, and everybody in Louisiana knows it. And those players at LSU knew it. I don't think they probably got mentally ready to play that football game last week. They'll be ready this week. They lost to Florida last year, and that was a tough loss at LSU. They'll be ready to play, and they've got enough weapons, whether it be outside of their wide receiver core or their running backs or the quarterback just making good decisions, and the fact that the defense plays so well, and Florida's going to have to play a whole lot better. That they will go out there and they'll play a great game, but I do think Florida will respond. And based on the way they played last year, and that'll give them some confidence that Florida will give them a good football game. But there's not enough there to me. It's like Clemson. When it came down to it, LSU was the better team.
Georgia struggled with Austin Peay. Now, they laid basically 48.5 points at home. They were up 14-3. They had basically, I think it was an hour and a half, 2-hour rain delay.
Yeah.
They get out of Dodge in Athens with a 22-point win. Gunnar Stockton, 26 of 34, 227, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Bright spot for me. Rushing attack is starting to look promising.
Yep.
Another 190-yard performance, 4.8 yards per carry. A significant upgrade in 2 games now, Coach. Compared to last year, we talked about it, 132 rushing yards per game. They're averaging close to 200. Those are the teams of old of Georgia.
Right.
But this line opened up at 6.5 in favor of the Bulldogs. Down now with multiple injuries in the secondary, down to only 3.5. Georgia's won 8 straight in the series. Is Joey Aguilar good enough to pull off the upset Saturday?
You know what? I think he gives them more than they had last year, and they didn't realize what they got when they got it. Now, again, I've said this before with you. At ULM, I coached against him. He was at App State. They came back to kick a 53-yard field goal and beat us, I think, 41-40 when we played them 2 years ago. He was fantastic. Let me tell you the key. They play defense. They run the ball. If he can consistently hit the deep ball, and all he has to hit is 2 or 3 times, it's enough to make a difference in this football game because he is a good quarterback, and he's already shown that they're happier with him than they were with Nico Iamaleava, and I think they're happier now. But I've seen him hit a couple of great deep balls, and if you remember back, because I studied them, I was about to put their offense in. I studied their entire 2022 season, and in 23, I was watching Nico each and every game. He couldn't do it quite like Herndon Hooker could do it. So really, the whole answer to me is Tennessee is a great deep ball thrower away from being back in contention for the conference championship. But they do have a very good team, and I think they can be in this game. But, boy, I tell you, Georgia, one thing about Georgia, they can be ahead by 10 points and be playing such good defense and running the ball that's a comfortable lead. You get other teams, and it's not a comfortable lead.
Right.
They're much more comfortable.
Are we giving the quarterback edge Aguilar over Stockton? Or we still
because he's a veteran. Aguilar's a veteran now. He's played a bunch of football games. And no, he hasn't played in the big stadiums every week, but Gunnar Stockton he's still a rookie in a lot of ways. He hadn't played in a lot of big games where the pressure's all on him. Now, the great thing again, Georgia, it doesn't ask the quarterback to be a Heisman. They ask him to be a good manager of the football team. Think of the quarterback that led their 2 national championships.
Stetson Bennett.
Stetson Bennett was just a great leader and a manager. That's all Gunnar needs to be. But I do believe that Aguilar may be more experienced, and they'll take chances with him that I'm not sure Georgia will want to take. And Georgia will want to go out there, run the ball, play defense, and don't make mistakes with their quarterback. Whereas Tennessee, if they'll hit some over the top throws, it'll get real dicey for Georgia.
I'm very intrigued with this game because it's one of the lowest spreads that we have seen in the series. And that goes back to the days of Hendon Hooker and goes back to the day, when Hendon Hooker and Tennessee walked into Georgia, they opened up as an 8.5-point dog, and they bet it down in the area of about 6.5 points. Coach, we're basically asking Joey Aguilar to win the game to cover this 3.5. That's what you're asking him. Right? I mean, field goal game.
One big play.
Right.
And they have the type of offense that can give him that one big play if he can hit it. Because you'll watch. I have never seen so many quarterbacks throw the deep ball. I call it an ooh ball. They throw that big old deep ball, and it's 1 or 2 yards too long, and everybody loves it. Ooh! It's all it was is one big incompletion's all it is. You got to underthrow that or throw it just right. And I think Aguilar is pretty good at that, but I'm not. I've still got Georgia on my mind. I feel like Georgia is going to have too much defense, run the football, control it, and not give up enough big plays. And I still have to lean toward Georgia in this one.
Yeah, I'm breaking down the stats after the show in deeper detail, but I give you the stats. Georgia's won 8 straight in the series.
Yes.
I'll give you the margin of victory. They have dominated in recent years, so we'll see how that game plays out. 2 other intriguing games before we go. One is in the SEC. Okay, last year, Vanderbilt was at home. They were catching 6.5 to Lenora Sellers in South Carolina. That was after they covered against Texas. They lost that game. I believe it was 24-21. They were catching, I believe it was almost 20 points in that game. They pushed Sark to the limit. They get South Carolina, and South Carolina last year smacked them around. They were just too physical in the interior, and Vanderbilt looked like the days when Jerry DiNardo, your good friend, was coaching them back in the day, right? Late 90s, in that aspect. They are now on the road in Williams-Brice, which we know is going to be a hornet's nest, okay? 5.5 points, Coach. Now, Diego Pavia and Vandy shocked me because it's not that they beat Vatek. It's that they ran away with that game last week, 44-20, after trailing by double digits in the first half.
Yeah, I'm already leaning towards Vandy in this one. Now, I've got but here's what I've got points, and so I've got points, and I'm not necessarily they don't have to win this thing, but right now the points give you field goal. Was it 5.5 right now or about there? I'm just saying. I looked at Virginia Tech and South Carolina. They run a punt back for a touchdown and throw a 68-yard bomb at the end of the game to put it away. But without those 2 plays, I don't know if they play that much better than Virginia Tech played in that game. And then I looked at the way Vandy just kept pouring it on and pouring it on. And I was picking Virginia Tech in that. I said, you know what? We've all caught on to Vandy. We've caught on to that quarterback. Well, truth be told, no, we haven't.
Right.
They're pretty dadgum good. And they play outstanding football. So, again, it's one of those deals where I am right now, and it's early in the week, but I got this feeling that I'm going to want to ride Vandy right now because the way they're playing, at least with the points. And if the points stay about right there, I may hang with it.
I tell you what, my heart is telling me all South Carolina. Again, that. That's, my heart right now is saying they smacked them around last year, and what's going to change, right? So I don't know yet, but early on, here we are, early part of the week, I'll just say Williams-Brice is an animal, right? It's one of the most underrated stadiums in all of college football. It's going to be a hornet's nest. It's going to be a crazy atmosphere. And this team, number 11 in the country, is sort of, okay, we're feeling our way out. They get this win over Vanderbilt. They're going to start feeling good about themselves. Something where, let's not forget, last year they had the heartbreaker to LSU. That set them back. They get smacked around by Ole Miss and Jackson Dart before they go on that here. The other one, and I thought early on they'd be live to potentially strike the upset. But Texas A&M, when you think, we can go back to the days, I keep telling Jackie Sherrill, R.C. Slocum, the Cotton Bowls. I remember Jerome Bettis and Notre Dame going toe-to-toe with the Aggies back in the day in the Cotton Bowl. I think Marcel Reed and Le'Veon Moss and this team, from an offensive perspective, could score points. The one thing I don't like that has me concerned about why I'm not all in on A&M is that defense is giving up points to garbage teams. That Jeremiah Love's going to run for 300 yards if that's the case, the way they played over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's the one thing I think I think Notre Dame will look at what they did against Miami and say, we got to run our back. But Jeremiah Love's got to get that ball. We've got to run the ball more. And I've seen enough of C.J. Carr, the young quarterback, to know that he was trained. He comes from Lloyd Carr's grandson. He knows how to be a quarterback, and that's important to know how to be a quarterback, not just to have the talent to be a quarterback, but to know the mental part, the cerebral part of being a quarterback. And he's got some talent. So he looks like to me the typical Big Ten type of quarterback. I think Notre Dame will ride that running attack, and I can see I see them pulling this one off too against Texas A&M. But man, it's going to be a great game. Like I say, it's in South Bend. Notre Dame will play well in South Bend, and I just have to say, I got to feel like they're going to say, "Gosh, we should have run the ball more with that Jeremiah Love last against Miami," and I could see that happening.
Yeah, I want to take the points. I really do. I want to take the points with Marcel Reed. Part of me says I don't like that Texas A&M hasn't, looked like the defense, right? But I say on the flip side. Right. Maybe I'm putting too much weight into Notre Dame's front seven because I didn't like what I saw against Miami. They couldn't get any pass rush against Carson Beck. And if they do get a pass rush, let's say they're overactive this week and they're crashing down, that could open up running lanes for Marcel Reed, especially if they play man-to-man coverage, right? If they're going to shell out to get a pass rush and Marcel Reed breaks contain, then we're looking at maybe 80 yards on the ground from this kid. We saw LSU have a similar game plan last year, and he abused them. Notre Dame comes to play like that, they're going to be in trouble. If they play more zone, right, and force Marcel Reed to work down the field, I think they kill them. I'm playing this out in my head. How is Marcus Freeman going to attack Marcel Reed, and that'll ultimately dictate whether I take the points or not.
Well, I think he's a smart head coach. He plays great defense, and I think they'll be very aggressive and make it tough on Marcel Reed. But with the way the spread is and the way Elko does with that team there, it's a tough one. And I'm just saying, as I look at Notre Dame, I look at what they lost that game and how big it is for them to come back, playing at home, touchdown Jesus, the whole atmosphere. It's an incredible play. I've been there. I've coached football games there many times, and it's a tough place to go in and win with a team like they have right now. And so, but it'll be a tough one. We'll see how that goes. But I'm gonna stay with Notre Dame. That was my thoughts. Because again, anytime you add those points, it starts to get real difficult to call those games. That's why they make it tough, because it's not all easy to pick. But I'm gonna stick with that. Notre Dame's gonna get Jeremiah Love the ball. He's gonna make some yardage this week.
We'll see. Mike Elko going back home. He was the DC for Notre Dame back in 2017. Went toe-to-toe with the Fighting Irish last year. Lost a heartbreaker with Connor Wegman in the first game of the regular season. Coach and I will break down more of the top 25 battles throughout the week on We're Going to Run It. We're hopefully going to have a Wednesday podcast and then potentially either a Thursday or a Friday podcast with our picks for this coming weekend. For Terry Bowden, I'm Joe Lisi. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you later in the week.